So welcome, Eric. I believe you're from the visiting us from the West Coast. So
Yep.
um, he's going to talk to us tonight about his second book. His first book was on the 82 Cardinals, I believe. Um, Obviously, this is being recorded, so anybody can see it afterwards. A reminder, guys, that since we didn't have the Babel last Sunday night, um, it will be this coming Sunday, or actually 2 weeks ago. It'll be this Sunday, um, due to the Orioles Sunday night baseball game, and nobody was probably going to show. So Dr. Jerry Mannheim will be talking to us with some of his folks from his publishing company. So Eric, I will make you a co-host in case you have any slides. Let me do that
I
now.
do, yeah.
Um, do, 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 do. Um, all right, you're good to go. So take it away, and I will let people in as they join. And guys, just save your questions to the end, like always. Greatly appreciated. Go ahead, Eric.
All right, sounds good. I will go ahead and share my screen here. All right, hopefully you can all see that now.
Yes.
Great. So yeah, I'm going to talk about my book, Season of Shattered Dreams, which was published a few months ago by Rowman and Littlefield. And I'll tell you a little bit about how I learned about this story and came to write this book, and a little bit about myself to start with. So I grew up in the St. Louis area in Alton, Illinois, which is about 20 miles from St. Louis on the Mississippi River. Grew up a big Cardinal fan, as you can see. That's me with Fred Bird on the left there. Grew up playing baseball. I got to play at Busch Stadium when I was in high school, and then had the opportunity to attend the 2011 World Series, which, as a fan, is one of my all-time highlights. That's me and my wife after Game 7. So I've always been a big baseball fan. Grew up rooting for the Cardinals. But about 10 years ago, my wife and I moved out here to the West Coast to Washington State. And then a few years ago, I joined SABR. During the pandemic, I started contributing to the bio project, and wrote a bunch of articles for that. Kind of enjoyed the process, and that led to me writing my first book, which was about the 82 Cardinals, called Runnin' Redbirds. I also contributed to the book One Hit Wonders, which was an effort by SABR. It's full of bios on players who had one major league hit. And I wrote about a guy named John Leovich, who played his one major league hit was off of Bob Feller. And in 1946, John Leovich played for the Bremerton Blue Jackets, which were a team out here in Washington State. In June of that year, his team was scheduled to play the Spokane Indians. And that series was canceled because of the team's tragic bus crash. So that's how I first learned of the accident, just kind of digging through newspaper archives, and was kind of surprised that I had never heard of it. And so it stuck in the back of my mind. And I did kind of what we all do when we're curious. I went to Google and found out what I could about the accident from what's been written previously. I found this article in 1994 Sports Illustrated edition about Jack Lorkey. He was one of the players involved in this story, as I will get into later. Jack's story is pretty well known. There's been quite a bit written about him over the years. Jack played in the major leagues, so he's certainly the most well-known person in this story. But as I dug for more information about the other players involved, I couldn't find much. So that's ultimately what prompted me to pursue writing this book. So go over a few of my resources where I got my information. Of course, newspapers.com was invaluable at looking day-to-day newspaper reports. Similarly, ancestry.com for birth and marriage records, census reports. military records. This accident occurred in King County, Washington. So the King County coroner's office and Spokane County court records were helpful. I was able to speak to a number of family members of the people involved. This accident occurred now 78 years ago, so there's no one left, of course, from that generation, but fortunately there are nieces, nephews, and children and grandchildren of the people involved. In the case of Ben Garrity, who I'll also talk about later, Ben went on to manage in the minor leagues in the 50s and 60s, and so I was able to track down about a half dozen players who he managed and got their stories for the book. And then a couple of family members shared scrapbooks of the players involved. These are a couple of the players who were killed in the accident, and their families kept these scrapbooks that were full of letters like the one you see here, as well as photographs and other memorabilia. So getting to kind of read these letters and see what these players were experiencing at the time was really helpful for me to kind of get their voice in the book and tell their story, which is ultimately my goal with this book. So this story takes place in 1946, just after World War II. During the war, of course, the major leagues did continue on as the teams got players wherever they could. Of course, there was a 15-year-old Joe Nuxall, and then guys well in their 40s, and guys who had deferments because of different physical problems. But in large part, the minor leagues shut down during the war. Before the war, there were 44 minor leagues in operation across the country. During the war, that number had reduced to 9. And so now in 46, you had thousands of discharged servicemen looking to return to the game. And so these minor leagues began to reorganize, including the Western International League, which was the league that the Spokane Indians played in. The Western International League was a Class B league. Back then, it was classifications were a little bit different. So Class B today would be equivalent to maybe a high A or double A team. These are the 8 teams that were in the league, located in British Columbia, Washington State, and Oregon. So after the war, the league began to reorganize. The teams began to fill out rosters. In the case of the Spokane Indians, they were an independent club, so they weren't affiliated with one specific team. They had these sort of informal working agreements with the New York Yankees, Oakland Oaks, and San Diego Padres. They also signed a few players independently. So that's how the owner, Sam Collins, filled out the roster. He hired a manager, Glenn Wright, who had played in the major leagues. One of the few players in history to have turned a unassisted triple play, in fact. So the Indians had a 3-week spring training in April of 46 in Marysville, California. The weather there was a little bit better than Spokane in April, so they traveled. This is the team leaving for spring training in late March of that year. So I'll kind of go over the roster and tell you a little bit about who these men were. This is where the Spokane Indians played their home games. It was a ballpark called Ferris Field. This is a picture of the stadium when it was built in 1937. By 46, it had a roof over the grandstand, but otherwise looked similar. There were railroad tracks running behind the first and third base lines that converged behind home plate. And just beyond the outfield wall, you can kind of see it there, there was a horse racing track. So a little bit about who these men were. On the opening day, I mentioned that Glenn Wright had been hired to manage the team, this former big league star, but he was actually fired on opening day by the team owner because Wright had gone on a bender on the way back from spring training in California. So the owner hired one of his players, catcher Mel Cole, to manage the team. This is Mel in his Spokane uniform. He was from Sacramento, California, and had signed with the Yankees in 1937, and then spent nearly 4 years serving in the war. So Mel Cole was suddenly the team's manager. I mentioned earlier Jack Lorkey. He was 22 years old at the time. He was born and raised in Los Angeles, had been a very successful semi-pro player in the LA area and signed with the San Diego Padres of the Pacific Coast League in 1941. The Padres sent him to Twin Falls, Idaho for a year before the war. And then during the war, Jack served in the 216th Field Artillery Battalion in General Patton's Third Army and actually fought in the Battle of the Bulge. So Jack spent nearly 2 years over in Europe and actually was nearly involved in a plane crash when he returned back to the States. He sailed back to New York and then was about to take the first flight of his life when he was bumped off the plane at the last minute by a higher ranking officer. And that plane later crashed after refueling in Kansas City. So Jack had survived the war. He was nearly in this plane accident. And now he was finally resuming his career with the Spokane Indians. The team's shortstop was a guy named George Risk, who was from Washington State. He had played quarterback at Pacific University in Portland, and then was stationed in Utah during the war. The team's second baseman was Ben Garrity. He was 33 years old. Ben had actually played in the major leagues with the Brooklyn Dodgers in 36 under Casey Stengel. And kind of it was a flash in the pan. He hit something like 380 in the first couple of weeks in the major leagues, but kind of quickly came down to earth, and ultimately his batting average dropped below 200, and so the Dodgers sent him to the minor leagues. And he bounced around the minors for a few years, and then was working at a military plant during the war when Casey Stengel actually recruited him back to play with the Boston Braves for a couple seasons during the war. He was kind of a utility infielder. And Ben was kind of hanging on to the end of his playing career in 1946 with Spokane. He actually had a long-term goal of managing in the major leagues. He had studied and learned the game under Stengel, and that was kind of his goal. I mentioned Ben. He had a very successful first couple weeks in the majors. That's him there in his Brooklyn uniform. The team's first baseman was Vic Pachetti, who was 18 years old and was by all accounts the best prospect on the team. Vic was born and raised in San Francisco. His parents had immigrated from Italy at the turn of the century, and his dad quickly took to baseball after coming to the States. And it was said that he put instead of a rattle on his son's hand, a baseball. So Vic Jr. Loved baseball from an early age, and then by age 16 was actually quite an accomplished player. He was considered one of the best players in the in San Francisco area. Was actually chosen to participate in an Esquire All-American game at the Polo Grounds in New York. This was sort of like an all-star game of the country's top high school players. And this game took place in August of 44. And so Vic took train across the country by himself. There was a reporter from the San Francisco Chronicle who kind of shadowed him and covered the game. This is a photo of the players on the West team. That's Vic Pachetti standing fourth from left next to Mel Ott, who managed the team. And then next to Mel Ott was Carl Hubble, who coached the team. Another person you may recognize on the far left is Richie Ashburn, who was also a member of that team. The East team was coached by Connie Mack, and the starting pitcher for the opposing team was Billy Pierce, who went on to have a long, successful career. So this is quite a achievement for Pachetti to not only attend this game, but he got 2 hits in the game and was by all accounts one of the best players on the field that day. Before the game, Abbott and Costello performed. The players got to go on Babe Ruth's radio shows. This was quite an experience for Pachetti, who had actually never left home before this game. There's another photo from the game at the Polo Grounds. There, Connie Mack and Mel Ott in the middle, and Pachetti kind of in the back row, second from left, kind of looking over his right shoulder. So as I mentioned, Vic was considered a can't-miss prospect. While he was in New York, Branch Rickey invited him to dinner and tried to sign him to play with the Dodgers. And it was reported that the Giants owner Stoneham had also tried to recruit Pachetti when he was in New York. Yankee scout Joe Devine said that Pachetti would no doubt make the majors, called him a natural. But Vic actually decided, instead of signing with a major league team, he signed with the Oakland Oaks upon returning home to the Bay Area. The Oaks were managed by Dolph Camilli, who was actually Vic's childhood idol. Dolph, like Vic, was a left-handed first baseman from San Francisco, and that was his idol growing up. So he decided to sign with Oakland. Vic also had a year of high school left too, which factored in his decision to sign with the Oakland Oaks of the Pacific Coast League. So Vic played with the Oaks in 45 under Camilli, who was actually fired during that season. And at the end of the year, the Oaks hired Casey Stengel to manage the team. And then Pachetti went to spring training with Oakland in the spring of 46, and it was Stengel who actually sent Pachetti to Spokane to get more experience. Again, you had all these players returning from the war who had filled up Oakland's roster, guys in their late 20s, early 30s. So Stengel thought it would be best for Pachetti, who did very well with Oakland in 45, hit 280, led the team in RBIs and triples. So clearly had shown that he could compete at the Pacific Coast League level, but Stengel thought he should get more experience. Going over more of the Spokane Indians players from that year, one of the outfielders was Levi McCormick, who was a member of the Nez Perce tribe from Idaho. He was a three-sport star at Washington State and had played in the Coast League in the late 30s before serving in the Navy during the war. The team center fielder was another very good prospect named Bob Patterson, who was also from San Francisco, actually went to the same high school as Vic Pachetti. He had signed with the Oaks before the war and then served in the Coast Guard. The right fielder was Bob James, a guy from Arizona who was a football star, but ultimately signed with the Yankees after high school, and then served in the Navy and also did some agricultural work during the war. His father owned a ranch outside of Phoenix, so Bob James did work at his father's ranch during the war. Freddie Martinez was one of the team's better hitters. He was kind of a utility guy. He could play the infield or outfield. He was from San Diego. He was a second-generation Mexican-American, and Freddie served in the Navy during the war and played with Johnny Mize while stationed in Hawaii. One of the team's catchers was Chris Harchie, another former Brooklyn Dodger. He had a cup of coffee with Brooklyn in 1939 under Leo DeRocher. And he had also served in the Coast Guard during the war. And Harchie actually just had joined Spokane on June 20th, so about 2 months into the season and about 4 days before the bus accident. Bob Kemen was one of the team's better pitchers. He had won 22 games for Spokane before the war. Here are a couple more pitchers, Gus Hallberg and Pete Barasoff. Joe Faria and George Lydon, a couple more pitchers. Joe was on the left, was from Oakland, and Lydon was from Idaho. A few more of the players. Milt Cadena was one of the team's better pitchers. Irv Kanapka, backup catcher, and Dick Powers, another former Pacific Coast League pitcher. So that's kind of a rundown of who these guys were, and gives you an idea. Obviously, most of them had just served in World War II and were looking to resume their baseball careers. A couple of them had already played in the majors. Several were up and coming, very good prospects. So it's a very talented team, especially on the offensive side of the ball. They could hit very well. They had 5 guys hitting over 300. And young Vic Pachetti was hitting 285 about 2 months into the season. They were 6 games above 500 in kind of a tightly packed division. They were in fifth place, but just a few games behind first place Salem. So on June 22nd, the team gathered for a team photo in between games of a doubleheader. On June 23rd, they had a very good come from behind victory against the first place Salem Senators. So they were in very good spirits on June 24th when the team left Spokane to travel across Washington State for their next series against the Bremerton Blue Jackets. So 16 players boarded the bus. Two of the pitchers, actually drove separately in one of the players' convertibles, and the rest of the team left in the late morning of June 24th. The team stopped for dinner in Ellensburg in central Washington. While they had dinner at a place called Webster's Cafe, the bus driver, who was a 24-year-old named Glenn Berg, took the bus to the local garage and evidently complained of some brake and engine trouble. They did a kind of a tune-up of the bus while the team had dinner. And around the same time, one of the players, Jack Lorkey, received a message from a police officer that had tracked the team down by way of phone call from the front office. It turned out the San Diego Padres wanted Jack to report to their team immediately. So he actually said goodbye to his teammates and hitchhiked back to Spokane. And it was just a short time later that the team boarded the bus and then went on their way. Now, back then, the road from Spokane to Seattle was a two-lane road. Now it's an interstate, which today the route takes about 4 hours. Back then, it was more like a 8 to 10 hour trip. So they reached the Snoqualmie Pass in the Cascade Mountains at an elevation of about 3,000 feet, just around dusk, around 8 p.m. as a light rain fell. It was reported that just over the pass, the bus encountered a car which had crossed over the center line. The bus driver, Glenn Berg, kind of hit the gas and tried to swerve around this oncoming vehicle. And ultimately, he had difficulty getting control of the bus, and it actually broke through a wire guardrail and went over and down a deep, steep ravine of approximately 300 feet. As the bus rolled, it caught fire and, as I mentioned, came to rest a few hundred feet below the road. So it was a horrific scene. Several players died instantly. And it was getting dark, and rescue efforts were incredibly difficult given the terrain. It was wet and dark, and rescue efforts continued throughout the night. Ultimately, 6 players did survive the crash, including Ben Garrity, who's pictured here. The bus driver also survived but sustained severe burns. A total of 9 players died as a result of the accident. Now, the aftermath of the accident, it made newspaper headlines across the country in the days following this incident. This is the front page of the Baltimore Sun on June 25th. You'll see in the second column, ball club bus crash kills 7. That was before 2 players died in the coming days. So the total death toll is 9. But it made headlines across the country. And immediately there was an outpouring of support. Donations came in from across the country to the Spokane daily newspapers, who started a benefit fund. Bob Hope donated $500, and the people in Spokane had a hole-in-one contest to raise money for the victims of the crash and the family members of the players involved. And the first person to sink a hole-in-one in this contest actually won on an airplane, believe it or not. There was also a benefit game, which was held at Ferris Field in Spokane on July 8th between Casey Stengel's Oakland Oaks and the Seattle Rainiers. Bing Crosby bought $2,500 worth of tickets and donated them to servicemen for the game. And all told, with all these fundraising efforts, more than $100,000, which is equivalent to nearly 2 million in today's dollars, was raised. And that money was distributed to the family members of the players killed, as well as the survivors of the accident. Now, remarkably, the season carried on. Just a week later, the Spokane Indians began playing games again. They had only 2 able-bodied players, and those are the 2 players who had driven separately in their convertible, pictured on the left and right, Joe Faria and Milt Cadena. That is Pete Barasoff and Ben Garrity, pictured in the middle. They were 2 of the 6 players who survived. All 6 players who survived sustained injuries to different extents. One player, Dick Powers, spent nearly 6 months in the hospital in a head-to-toe cast. Basically, he had a fractured spine. The team owner, Sam Collins, tried to get players however he could to fill out the roster and continue on the season. He employed the team trainer as the third baseman. He signed some semi-pro players and some other guys who had been released by other organizations. And ultimately, the Indians went 22-52 the rest of the way. So it was a pretty rough season in terms of the standings once this season resumed. Now, of the 6 players who survived, 5 of them actually continued their professional careers, although several dealt with nagging injuries that ultimately led to pretty brief careers after this accident. And ironically, the 2 players who were not involved in the crash, the 2 pitchers who drove separately, they shouldered a ton of innings for the team when they resumed playing. They were basically pitching on 2 to 3 days rest consistently, and both of them actually blew out their elbows the following season and never pitched again. So even though they were not directly involved in this accident, the ripple effects were certainly felt. Ben Garrity actually became the team's manager the following season. Again, he had a dream of managing in the major league someday. And after 1 season managing in Spokane, he was hired by the New York Giants, spent a few years in their system, and then was hired by the Milwaukee Braves to manage in their minor league chain. Ultimately was promoted up to a Class A in Jacksonville, and that's where he managed Hank Aaron in 1953. Aaron that year was one of 3 players on the Braves who integrated the South Atlantic League that year. Garrity, by all accounts, was considered a kind of a baseball savant. Again, he had learned the game from Casey Stengel, was kind of a student of the game. And Henry Aaron later called him the greatest manager I ever played for, and perhaps the greatest manager who ever lived. Ben was also a subject of Pat Jordan's excellent memoir, False Spring. Ben was sort of haunted by this accident. However, in order to sort of reach his dream of managing in the major leagues, he had to get experience in the minors, and that meant bus travel. And he coped with this by drinking alcohol. And that ultimately led to some health complications and a pretty early death at the age of 50. Those are a few of the players that shared their memories of Ben for the book. John Demerit, who was a bonus baby with the Braves. Joe Morgan, who went on to manage the Boston Red Sox. And of course, everybody knows Tommy John. So those players all, by and large, had glowing things to say about Ben Garrity and how knowledgeable of a baseball man he was, a true baseball lifer. Jack Lorkey, of course, he was the player who was called away from the bus and reported to San Diego. Performed very well for the Padres for the rest of the 46 season, and was selected by the New York Giants in that winter's Rule 5 draft. Now, quickly after the accident, Jack was given a nickname which he was kind of stuck with for the rest of his life, and that was Lucky Lorkey. Not only rolled off the tongue, but it was, of course, a very fitting nickname given how close he was to being involved in this bus accident, as well as the near-death experiences he had in the war, and then with this plane crash after returning from the war. Jack had a great rookie season with the Giants in 47, hit 11 home runs, and actually hit the Giants' 183rd home run of that season, which broke the single season team record, which was previously held by the Yankees. Ultimately, Jack kind of settled into a utility role and spent 7 seasons in the major leagues with the Giants and Phillies. He did appear in the World Series in 51 against Casey Stengel's Yankees. And then wrapped up his career in the Pacific Coast League. And interestingly enough, he did security work for the CIA after his baseball career. So Jack had a truly extraordinary life, but he was a very quiet guy and did not like to talk about his time in the war or this Spokane Indians accident. And understandably, you can imagine why. The Spokane Indians still exist today. They're a single A affiliate of the Colorado Rockies. And interestingly, the team has collaborated with the Spokane tribe. The city of Spokane is actually named after the indigenous people of Eastern Washington, the Spokane tribe. And the team wears the jerseys, which you see here, which has the Salish language, Spokane written in Salish on the front of the jersey. So kind of a cool collaboration. So this is actually a telegram which came from Vic Picchetti's scrapbook. This is a Western Union telegram that Vic sent to his mother, letting her know that he had arrived safely in Spokane in April of 46. And I'm happy to take any questions, and thanks for your attention.
Anybody have questions for Eric? I saw somebody commented in the chat about a Vista Stadium.
Oh yeah, yeah, it's a really cool stadium. It was built in the I think late 50s when the Indians became a AAA affiliate of the Dodgers. So it has that, it was built in that era, and almost has to me like a little bit of like a Dodger Stadium feel to it. And I think they just started doing some renovations to the ballpark that they are starting now that the season is over. But yeah, great ballpark.
Got good comments there. Appreciate everybody. Thanks, Eric. This was interesting. Obviously, I didn't know anything about this. Looking forward to reading it somewhere down the line. I got a backlog of books, as you know.
Yeah.
In the SABR world, they seem to come out almost daily. Were you at SABR convention in Minneapolis?
I was not. Unfortunately, I had some other conflicts, but was hoping to go. But I definitely plan on going next year in Dallas. So
Okay, definitely. We'd love to see you, obviously. We hosted it a couple years ago. Those who remember 2 years ago already, I can't believe it. And we did a good job, and we hope to do it again somewhere down the line. So appreciate your time out there on the West Coast. You're still a Cardinals fan, I assume?
yeah, I still root for the Cardinals. Definitely have jumped on the Mariners bandwagon. Although both teams are have had their struggles the last couple of years. So, but really kind of envious of the Orioles, what they have going on this year. So they're
Right now,
exciting.
the Orioles are losing to the White Sox, so you might
Oh,
want to hold those comments, at least temporarily. We are in first place currently, but giving up a possible W to the what may be the worst team in MLB history is not something I'm looking forward to. But we're banged up, as most people who are Orioles fans know. So
yeah.
coming
Yeah,
down.
the Cardinals lost 2 of 3 to the White Sox earlier in the year. So.
The Orioles got swept by the Cubs and the Cardinals this year. So
Oh, that's right.
And the Cubs are my number 2 team, and you know, I love the Cubs, but they came into Baltimore and took all 3, and I was like, oh, that's kind of ugly. Um, all righty. Well, I'll let everybody get back since everybody seems kind of quiet. I know it's early September. I'm not sure about out west, but it's starting to cool down here. Still gets in the 70s during the day, but the temperature's definitely in the evening cooling down. I actually had a jacket on when I was over at the game earlier. So
Yep. Days are getting shorter.
days are getting shorter, 3.5 months of Christmas, whatever else you want to look at. So playoffs will be here in 4 weeks. Who knows? And you know, I'm married to a Philadelphia girl, so I'm probably going to have to hear her mouth running too. All that kind of stuff, even though I can't stand that franchise. So great, Eric. I'm glad you're on our roster. Please participate. You know, obviously we have coming up events every 2 weeks, twice a month.
Yeah.
And I'm hoping that we can, you know, have some good stuff coming in the future. Obviously, we're booked up through December already. And you know, newsletter for those of you guys who contribute or want to contribute. Submissions are due for the next volume at the end of this month. So the number 3 on this year. So somebody said their concentration is also on pre-war, post-war baseball. Interesting. All righty.
Yeah. It's certainly a fascinating time in our country's history. And then, yeah, Howie Bedell, I got to talk to him. He went on to have he played for Ben Garrity and then was eventually a scouting director. So he had some interesting things to say about playing for Ben and then hearing why Ben never got his chance to play in the major leagues. And he shared that it was ultimately related to his drinking. So Howie was an interesting guy to talk to. Still sharp as a tack.
You don't hear too often. Well, appreciate it again. Thank you, everybody who joined us. See you at the next virtual meeting, which obviously will be this weekend because it's rescheduled from the end of August. So that'll be Sunday evening. I guess that's the 8th. So the end of the Orioles homestand. The Orioles have 3 games this weekend against Tampa, 2 giveaways, and a Saturday or the Sunday game is actually at noon because it's the Roku or Apple game or whatever broadcast is carrying it. So got to get there extra early. So see you guys next time around. If you have any questions, you know how to reach me. And we appreciate Eric's time and good luck.
Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, on to the next time. So Connie, Jack, everybody, Kirk, thank you for joining us and see you next time around. Have a good evening, guys.